Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the Arizona Cardinals site from USA Today NFL Wire, and Seth Cox is my co-host with me tonight, recording on a Tuesday night from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, the SB Nation Arizona Cardinals site. We're on episode 338, talking about the Cardinals after, sadly, they did not take care of business. They did about the most unimaginable thing that they could do and not just get beat by the Lions, which were a one-win team coming in. They got their pants beat off of them by the Detroit Lions on the road. And now we're almost have to rethink everything. And that on tonight's show, recording on a Tuesday night, so you guys are hearing it probably Wednesday or sometime later in the week. Is it time to panic? What went wrong? What is their chance at winning at the division? What would be considered a failure? And then we'll look at their Christmas night matchup against the Indianapolis Colts. So, Seth, at this point, is it time to panic about what's happening with the Cardinals? Are you there yet?
Yeah, I think that you have to. I think it's the reality of they've obviously lost, 2 games in a row, but then the way that they lost to the Detroit Lions, who were, for all intents and purposes, the worst team in the NFL, it makes it very difficult now to defend or to give time or allow kind of for mistakes this team and this group. And that's the unfortunate thing. So I guess the good thing is they built up enough room that they could get to this point where they're 10-4 and they're battling for the 2 seed. Despite being 3-4 in their last 7 games. But at the same time, to your point, they've done this before, and it ended up that they ended up not making the playoffs. And that's still a possibility, which is kind of baffling, right? That they could technically not make the playoffs. I guess we've just been waiting for them to clinch at this point. But yeah, I mean, it's just, I don't know what you make of this team and this group at this point, other than you have to kind of say you're disappointed and waiting for them to show you who they are.
Right. For me, the panic, am I panicking? I'm not quite panicking, but I am kind of on high alert if there is anything less than a panic that's still kind of in that same scenario, because the Cardinals don't have an easy schedule the rest of the way. So they have to play a very tough Colts team. They have to go to Dallas to play the Cowboys, who now are 10-4. And then they have to play the Seahawks at home, a team that did not help the Cardinals tonight on Tuesday night, ended up losing to the Rams. A Seahawks win would have gone a long way to help the Cardinals. But we know Cardinals-Seahawks is never a walk in the park. And so basically the feeling, the visceral reaction that you get after losing to the Lions the way they did is then it raises the question, are they going to win a game the rest of the season, which rationally, of course, they're going to win at least one more game and clinch the playoffs. But the way they ended last year, just it's a red flag. We've seen Cliff Kingsbury's teams at Texas Tech fade late in the year, and so it's just something that is on people's minds, and so yeah, it's something you worry about. But something we talked about before the show is like almost every team will have some sort of a lull. If the Cardinals manage to go out and win the next 3 games, we'll all have a good laugh about the worries that are they going to win another game? Are they going to even make the playoffs? They finished 13-4 and the number 2 seed, number 3 seed. Hey, but right now it feels like the season is falling apart. I wrote right after the game that the Cardinals season is on the verge of falling apart. It's right there. It's teetering. That this game, this weekend, really tells us a lot about the Cardinals. We know they only need one more win, but we don't want them to back into the playoffs kind of the way they started the season. And so panic isn't the word for me, but I'm definitely highly concerned. Highly concerned. Even the optimist in me, kind of the one who's overly optimistic about everything all the time when it comes to the Cardinals, I am highly concerned.
I wrote something similar. I wrote that the season is crumbling. It's not crumbled. It's not completely wrecked. It's not over, but it is crumbling. And that makes things difficult, because if you get into a situation where you make the playoffs by backing in at 10-7, I guess if you win in the first round, does it matter as much? But basically you're there as playoff fodder at that point, right? Like nobody really takes you seriously.
Right. And that for me, that's the biggest concern, is because we kind of built up this team and the belief in the leadership between Steve Kine and Cliff Kingsbury, because of the way the season has gone, because they've looked great at times this year. But if they fade, it raises questions about the sustainability of the success they're having, and we know they're dealing with some critical injuries, losing to DeAndre Hopkins and J.J. Watt, losing Rodney Hudson right down to the COVID list. It's almost comical how someone critical seems to go down every week, but nonetheless, I mean, it kind of undoes everything that they've done so far, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing, is like it changes your perception of the season, because 7-0 to 10-7 again makes you a loser, right? And then if you make the playoffs but get bounced, because that's the thing, is like, yes, at the beginning of the season, it's easy to say the goal was to make the playoffs. The goal was, but we said it. Everything changed at 7-0. At 7-0 and losing on a fluke situation on Thursday Night Football to the other, great team in the NFC, that meant you had arrived. And now, to your point, the question is this a sustainable grouping? Is this a duo in Cliff and Kime, or I guess trio and Kyler, that can win, that can be contenders? Or are they a team that gets out to hot starts and then fades because they don't have enough depth, they don't have talent inside, on the offensive and defensive line, and they've been built incorrectly? And so you start to see kind of the chinks in the armor, as it were. Those are all questions that the next 3 games are going to answer. And to be frank, if they end up losing if they make the playoffs and lose in the first round, we're going to have questions no matter what. If they win the next 3 games and lose in the first round, we're going to have questions, right? But I can tell you, if they lose the next 3 games back into the playoffs as let's say the 6th seed, and then lose to the 3 seed in the first round, I don't know if there will be any questions. I think that there will just be statements at that point. Would you not agree?
Yeah, that's the part it's really hard to kind of gauge in this sort of scenario. But if we're going to ask, are the Cardinals done? That's the one I kind of laugh at. No, the Cardinals aren't done.
No, they've got
They're
three
not
games
done.
left to really prove themselves. Now, if they go out the next two games and they look like they did against Detroit, yeah, they're done.
Yeah.
But that's different. Like, they're not done because they lost in an embarrassing fashion to Detroit. They're done if they respond by playing the same way they did in Detroit and losing in the same manner. Because that means that, one, the team has quit, and you can't have that. For everything else, the one thing that you cannot have is a team that quit. And that...
Well, and we thought this team was beyond that.
No, we expected it.
Right.
And thus far it hasn't happened. So we'll have to see what happens next, because we can only go off the information we have now. We can tell you, and we'll talk about this more once we get to our preview. But here's what I'll say. The Arizona, based on how they have played the last 2 weeks, we are not expecting the Arizona Cardinals to win on Saturday, just based on how they've played the last 2 weeks. The reality is, though, this isn't like before where you go, oh, this team sucks, they have no chance. No, instead you go, no, this team's got the talent. And if they come out and play their type brand of football, then they're good enough to play with anybody and they'll win a game.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And hopefully they've turned things around this week and it changes the narrative completely, because the narrative is going in the wrong direction. If those of you who listen to this show every week, you'll notice there's a markedly different tone about this show this week because of what happened in Detroit. So coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web, let's move on and talk about what happened in Detroit. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. So, 30-12. Is there something? Is there anything that you can sum it up to? What is it that went wrong in Detroit against the Lions?
I think they just came out with a lack of intensity. I really do. I mean, I don't think there's any other way to describe it. I don't know if they came out expecting to win or expecting the Lions to lay down. The one thing you and I talked about is that this Lions team plays hard, right? Like, you watch the film on this Lions team, they are severely devoid of talent in a lot of places, but they play hard. They have bought in wholesale to Dan Campbell and whatever he is, whatever he's selling up in Detroit, they're all bought in. And so I think they came out, they're like, okay, they drove down the field, got a field goal, no big deal, right? Like, no big deal. The Cardinals don't get anything going offensively. They get that punt inside the, what was it, the 3? They were at the 3, right? Or
yeah,
one of the two. And
that was the 7.
You're like,
it was the 7.
Yeah, and so then everybody's like, okay, well, it'll bounce back right here. Like, the offense will come out, or the defense will come out and get a stop. Like, no big deal. Like, it was one drive, right? Like, yeah, it was what felt like a 20-minute drive, but it was one drive. It's no big deal. And they come out and go 93 yards for a touchdown. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh crap. Right. And then you come out again and you go -2 yards and punt. Okay, well, now things are bad. And then the defense is like, okay, we gotta wake up. I mean, yeah, it's the Lions, but like, come on. They put up a field goal and a touchdown, in the first 15 minutes and 7 seconds of the game. We got to do better. And then you come out and you get a little drive going, and then you have 5-on-5 blocking and just don't block the end. And it was like, at that point, it was like, okay, that's when you started to get a little concerned, right? You're like, okay, what's going on here? Like, they only brought one extra guy, and you guys didn't block their clear best pass rusher, Charles Harris. Like, and Kyler usually escapes that. He didn't. It is what it is. So they punt again, and then you get all of a sudden now they're getting some stops, and you get down there with 2 minutes to go, and Cliff makes another call, man. I mean, you and I talked about it before. That 100 times out of 100, he makes that call, and we don't say anything, right? Like, inside, where were they at? The 3?
It was the 2, I think.
Yeah, and they run a basically
not the 3. It was a 3.
Basically, they run a slant pick play. But man, you got, like, if you and I sat down and we said, okay, you got to have a play from your any offensive player. Let's rank them in order of how you want, what you want, whose hands you want the ball in. And you'd say, okay, Kyler would be 1 or 1A, right? James Conner would probably be 2 at this point. And then we start to talk, okay, maybe Christian Kirk's 3 right now with Hopkins out. And then Green or Chase Edmonds is 4. And then Green or Chase Edmonds is 5. And then Rondell 6. And then, oh, you know what? I'll probably put Zach Ertz ahead of Rondell or and so you go through all these names. The last one on the list is going to be Antoine Wesley, right?
Right.
And so you run a slant screen pick thing for Wesley that you run for DeAndre Hopkins, and I get that you're just trying to run the offense the same way, but that was it, because then your defense comes out and they get 30 yards of penalties. Agree or disagree with the penalties, doesn't matter. You get 30 yards of penalties, and they go 93 or 97 yards in less than 2 minutes and score a touchdown. And I think the white flag was waved right there. And I know they only had 19 seconds left, but they had 19 seconds and 2 timeouts. And all season we've seen Cliff be
They've been
aggressive.
so good. They've been so good to having just a few seconds. How many times have they gone in 30 seconds and less? They've gone 40 yards to get a field goal at least.
Yeah, and so for them to come out and just kneel down, that was the white flag waved, right? I mean, and I get it was 17-0 at halftime, blah blah blah. That was the white flag. They were like, "Oh, we give up." And it was just like, in the second half was nothing different. Like, they came out, they got the field goal finally. So instead of it being, but that's the thing, instead of it being 10-6, right? Because you kick the field goal, then you don't have that momentum swing, then you don't have those stupid penalties. And so instead of it being 10-6, now it's 17-3.
Yeah.
And now you're basically playing with fire because you have to play perfect the rest of the way. And then we get the dumb interception from Kyler. And it was just, it was what it was.
Yeah, for me, the Cardinals, they're not great at playing off schedule. We've seen that this year. In fact, the defense, even though the Lions came out and chewed up nearly 9 minutes of clock and only came away with 3 points, that kind of set the stage. But it wasn't the death. It wasn't it wasn't even, that would have been fine. The Cardinals normally, after that happens, okay, so they gave up a long drive. Normally the offense responds. That's been kind of the thing. They get a stop, they get a points, and then they kind of go from ahead. Their offense just didn't get in rhythm. And it was, honestly, they've been really the problem with the untimely penalties, the drive-killing penalties, has kind of been the issue. So no, you didn't like to see, and Detroit came out with a great game plan. I'm gonna echo what everyone on the Cardinals team said on Sunday and since, which is that Detroit had a great game plan and executed it very well, which they did. They played hard. They executed well. But yeah, the tone changed after that. After the field goal, they're nearly in field goal range. And the play call, all right. So you had an RPO. Kyler kept, didn't get any games. They got the 6-yard, but the false start really messed it up because they're at 3rd and 4th to 35. They go back to the 40. They lose the yard, 41. You could have gone for a 59-yard field goal, but at that point of the game, that might be a little bit excessive, and so they go with the punt. I think kind of what put them on life support was the touchdown pass to St. Brown when Goff beat him. Because that we were like, oh, crap. Now, 10 points down is not something the Cardinals are used to. And then, which is what you said, when they didn't get any points on their drive, that really did it. And then they got further behind. So the Cardinals have not been great about off schedule on the offense in general. This team goes very well when it stays on time, when it stays on schedule. But once you get 17 points down, it's nearly impossible. I don't criticize, normally I have no problem with them going for it on 4th and goal at the 3. But like I said on Twitter, you were saying as well, if you're going to run a DeAndre Hopkins play without DeAndre Hopkins, you probably ought to take the points at that point. Either have a better play or kick the field goal, make it 10-3, and then don't give up a 97-yard drive after that. That was the defense. I don't know if it was just that the defense had the offense normally fuels the defense. So usually the both units of the ball, they will fuel the other. The defense didn't fuel the offense this time around, but then the offense didn't give it, and so the air was completely let out. The 17 points, the halftime deficit, that was just too much. And then after that, it was a case of, hey, they didn't have it. Cliff himself said, you got to stop looking for the 17-point play. They did change. It was like after halftime, though, when they started to run the ball more, they just didn't execute well enough early. You can't go 3 and out in your first drive and then give up a touchdown after that. It's just not something you could do. And so the defense, they had issues defensively, and they never recovered offensively. And so it steamrolled, like against Carolina. Only this time it wasn't an issue of turnovers. It was just an issue of execution. And then it looks like they're going to get their momentum back. They get that turnover. Okay, now they're going to make their move. 2 plays later, the interception. That was the interception was on a number of things. 1, it was a late throw. 2, it was a great play by Warrior. But then, what in the world was AJ Green doing? 1, make an effort to come back to the ball, which is kind of what Kyler wanted to do. And then 2, when you see the guy making a play in an interception, don't just go, oh crap. I don't know what he was doing. It's been 2 or 3. There's been a few times this season where we're seeing where is his head? Where is his effort? I don't know what that is, but we talked about it also before the show. AJ Green's head isn't always in the game, it feels like.
Yeah, and it feels like the more you watch, the more you see why Cincy was willing to let him go. And it has less to do with talent than it does with his.
Is it? I don't want to say it's his heart, but
right,
it's just the effort, like the fire.
Yeah, his work, his effort to try and make plays.
The intensity is not there anymore.
Yeah, and it's just interesting. I mean, there's a lot to it, man, and this has just been one of those ruts of games. We talked about it, right? Like going 2-1 without Kyler was big and should have been the catalyst to this team playing special ball the rest of the season. And instead it's turned into, is this a team, like you said earlier, the questions, are they a fraud? Are they done? What has happened? And so that's the frustrating thing, is that they had the right momentum going, and they've just completely lost it. And because it's at the same time of year that it happened last year, you're one. And here's the thing too, man. I'll say this. You and I obviously have never played professional sports, so we don't understand the mental aspect. We can look at what it takes physically to do the job, and you and I obviously know, like, we can't do that. but the mental aspect, the grind, and then the moments, right? And we've seen the graphic now. They're 0-4 with chances to clinch a playoff spot in the Cliff and Kyler era.
That's a narrative that's hard to beat. It's hard to beat that narrative.
And and all of a sudden it starts to really feed in, right? Like, holy crap. Like, are we choke artists? Like, is the moment too big for us? And then you get those mistakes, and you start to doubt yourself, and you start to doubt your teammates, and is it the right play? Is it the right grouping? Is it and all of that kind of festers. And that's my biggest concern, is that's what we're seeing right now, is the mental aspect of it.
Is it starting to snowball in their heads? Like, it's like one bad thing leads to another bad thing, and now those two bad things are now a big thing, instead of just, let's move on to the next thing. How about this? What is it about Jared Goff that the Cardinals can't figure out? Because Jared Goff has he has now beaten the Cardinals 8 straight starts. They beat Sean McVay earlier this year, and Goff has exactly 2 wins in his career without McVay. One of them is against the Cardinals, and he looked, I don't know what it was. It's just that some of the Cardinals that we needed with no Hopkins, the Cardinals needed their best players to be better. Christian Kirk had drops. A.J. Green lost his head on the interception. Chandler Jones and Marcus Golden really didn't do anything. And so their biggest names didn't do anything, which was disappointing. Like, Christian Kirk has had a fantastic season, and he had a productive game, 9 catches for 94 yards and a touchdown, but it felt like it was a letdown game because of the 2 or 3 missed plays that, honestly, we feel he should have had, because the receivers dropped a lot of passes. They did not help Kyler out. Kyler, he hasn't been as in rhythm with his throws, but he's also been under more pressure, and it's almost like, Max Garcia was working great earlier in the year. He hasn't been working out as well. Kind of like what Josh Jones was great earlier in the year. After a few games, then the play dropped. The play level dropped. Max Garcia was in there, played great. Then the play level dropped. I don't know what it is with the linemen this year and the drop in production, but it seems to be going in that direction.
Yeah, and I mean, whether it's DJ or Calvin, I mean, those guys making mental mistakes, is something that, and again, I don't know the call, so I'm not going to blame DJ for that Charles Harris sack. But he's had false start issues, and then Kelvin had the false start, and then was that DJ? It was DJ's guy in terms of the way that they were lined up. Now, if the call was for the back or somebody else, don't know. So I'm not going to be like, oh, that was the sack was on DJ. But I feel like those are mental errors. Like the holdings against Aaron Donald the week before, they're frustrating. They are. But those are physical errors. And the Christian Kirk, he had 2 drops in this game. Zach Ertz had 2 drops in this game. Like, you can get over those plays, but the mental errors, the effort errors. Those are the things that you have to, like, that's where you're starting to get concerned more than anything.
Yeah, and it snowballed into the perfect storm of awfulness, which led to, I don't know if they've had a worse, like, we've seen some bad losses. Considering the situation, this was as embarrassing as you could have, because it wasn't a game where Kyler Murray was hurt. It wasn't like, Kyler.
It wasn't like, I mean, you're missing one of your best offensive players, but
it's
like,
not like
else.
losing to the 49ers and Rams last year when you're playing with. I will say this matches the 49ers loss last year when they lost to CJ Beathard. I think it is equal to that, because they kind of felt the same way. They had no excuse losing either team, and they ended up getting dominated.
Right, and I think that's a fair one. Like, I think it's fair to look at it from that perspective, and that's the hard part, man. Like, we're in a spot where this group is in a similar situation to last year. They just had a better middle part of the season, or I guess they had a better start to the season and a similar middle part to the season, and you're just trying not to see them finish on a low note.
That's right. Coming up next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move on and we'll look at the playoff race, specifically the NFC West, because they now are tied. So Cardinals 10-4, Rams are 10-4. What's it going to take to win the division? What are their chances? That's coming next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk about the NFC West. The Cardinals did not get any help from the Seattle Seahawks on Tuesday night. A Seahawks win would have gone a long way to helping the Cardinals. The Rams won that game. The Seahawks, they made mistakes. The refs were terrible. I don't know what to think about all of that. But anyway, the Seahawks are now 5-9. They're going to have a losing season. The Rams and Cardinals are now 10-4. The Cardinals are still technically in first place because they are 4-1 in the division, and the Rams are 3-2 currently. Each has 3 games left. What's it going to take? Basically, based on I kind of broke down the scenario last week. I broke it down also on Cards Wire. With 3 games left, the Cardinals have a magic number of 4. So any combination of 4 Cardinals wins and Rams losses will do it. But there are other ways to do that as well. So the Cardinals have the Colts this weekend. Then they go on the road to play Dallas and then come home to close the season against the Seahawks. The Rams are on the road in Minnesota. Then they will take on the Baltimore Ravens. They're on the road for both of those games and will close the season at home against the San Francisco 49ers. The way things look right now, there's two tiebreakers that kind of matter. One is simply, one wins. The Cardinals need to keep pace with the Rams. They can't let the Rams get ahead of them, basically. If the Cardinals go 3-0, fantastic. That takes care of everything for a number of ways. But there are 2 games, there's kind of 2 scenarios that help the Cardinals significantly. 1, beat the Colts. The Cardinals need to do that this weekend. 2, the Rams, if they lose to the Vikings this weekend, that will clinch a tiebreaker on common opponent. So if the Cardinals win this week and the Rams lose to the Vikings, the magic number drops from 4 to 1, which means 1 Rams loss or 1 Cardinals wins in the final 2 games will clinch the division. The other scenario is Week 18. A Cardinals win over the Seahawks or a Rams loss to the 49ers also clinches the divisional tiebreak. That's in the scenario where they end up with the same amount of wins. But what do you see in this NFC West race over the last 3 games?
I see a hard road for the Cardinals, man. I mean, like, there's nothing to it at this point.
Luckily, it's equally difficult for the Rams. Let's be honest.
It is, and that's good. But the reality is the Cardinals have put themselves in a position where they're going to have to earn it. And we talked about it when they came back. They had 2 gimmies, and they missed one of those gimmies, right? And so now they're down to, well, two really difficult games. And then, excuse me, I think you figure out what you have in Seattle and what Seattle's going to want to do. I mean, that may be a point where Seattle's flying the white flag, right? Like, so that might work out for you. But you don't want your only win in the last 5 games to be against the Seattle team waving the white flag. You want to be able to go out and win and say, hey, we did this, we earned it. Don't question us, don't question our abilities. Um, and unfortunately, right now, that's not where they're at. And so instead, they've made it they've made life much more difficult for themselves than it needs to be.
Yes.
Let's just put it that way. I mean, there's always going to be games you're going to look back and go, that's the one. But I mean, we were hoping this year would be different. And there's 2 games right now, obviously, the Panthers and the Lions, where you're the superior team. Yes, you can look back at the Green Bay and LA games where the games themselves were closer. But the reality is you were the better team, clearly the better team than Carolina and Detroit, and you lost those 2 games. And so now you've made it where you've got to beat 2 teams that are vying for seeding in the playoffs. I mean, the Colts, I think, are just a game back, or maybe did they overtake Tennessee this week? Because I know Tennessee lost. I'm pulling it up right now as we speak.
So Tennessee's 9-5, so they're still a game
okay,
up on the.
They're still a game up. So that's what I'm saying. So this is a massive, massive game for the Colts, because you're talking about right now, the Titans are the 3 seed. If the Colts win, I think they have the advantage over the Bengals, and they'll jump from the 5 seed to the 3. Do you know how big that is to go?
So they could go as high as the 2 seed, depending on what Tennessee and New England do.
New England do.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's massive. And the Cardinals are in the same boat. So that's the thing, is like, this game was always one that we had on the schedule. You and I looked at from the beginning and said, this is a tough game, man. I mean, the Colts are a good team. They've got a good defense. They have a phenomenal running game. What are the Cardinals going to do? And instead of having a game or 2 to play with, now they're in, I mean, let's be honest, they're desperate at this point. Like, this is desperation time, because you can't go into the playoffs 1-4, God forbid 0-5. And so this is, so they've got to take care of business on their end, and they've made their life difficult in having to win these games that are do or die against teams that are in the same spot as they are.
Yeah, I like how the schedule lines up, because it creates a playoff-like scenario. The problem is they made it like the playoffs, where basically, they lose and they're done. I'll pose this question next, and that would be this one. If the Cardinals don't win the division, do you view this season as a failure?
Yeah, I would at this point, because of how far ahead they were going into that week 14. It was the week 14 matchup with the Rams, right?
Yeah.
Like, basically, you had to win that. If you won that game, you all but clinched the division. The Rams had to lose or win every game. The Cardinals had to lose every game. And they lost a game that was close, that they had some chances at. They lost. But then to come back the next week and just completely lay an egg against the team with the worst record in the NFL. I'm not going to say they're the worst team because, I mean, the Jaguars are clearly the worst team. But with the worst record in the NFL, that was an issue.
Yeah.
And I think that is why this season is a failure if they do not win the division, barring a deep playoff run. You can flip that on its head. So if you end up as the 5 seed and you play the Rams in the first round, which, I mean, that's what it's looking like at this point, right? It's going to be the Cardinals-Rams rubber match
Oh, man.
in the first round. But you can flip that on its ear if you make a deep playoff run, and then it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah, that's true.
But to your point, we're judging it based on what we know now. And what we know now is if the Cardinals that were the 1 seed going into week 14 and are the 4 seed coming out of week 15 end up as the 6 or lower or the 5th or lower seed, that's a disappointing season.
Absolutely. Now, the big picture, you look back and before the end of the year, no one thought the Cardinals were going to win the division. So if they finished 10-7, 11-6, and made the playoffs, that's what we thought. The problem is they never trailed in the division. They went 7-0 to start. They've been the number 1 seed. They won their first 4 division games. You set yourselves up for higher expectations, and so based on reset expectations, if you don't win the division, it is a failure unless you win the Super Bowl, in which case you're like, oh, you're a wild card team making the Super Bowl. But
right,
that would just
ask you.
I don't think that's going to happen, but
no. But let me ask you this. All right, so I mean, we're playing with scenarios right now. If you go 5-1 in the division, so say they go, say they beat Seattle week 18, but they lose to Indy and Dallas, and LA wins out, so LA wins the division. Like, don't you look at it and you kind of go, man, you overplayed your hand by gearing everything up too much towards the division, right? Like, you're like, you focus too much on winning the division, and then we're not good enough to beat teams outside of your division. Like, it would be kind of ironic, wouldn't it, that we've lamented, like, hey, four wins, you're contending in the division. 5 wins, you basically guaranteed you win the division, but You're so bad outside of your own division, which was supposed to be the best, and is going to have 3 teams in the playoffs, by the way.
It will.
You go 5-1 in that division, but you still don't win the division because you ended up going, what would that be? 5-5 would it be, or 5-6, or it'd be 6-5 outside of your division. So you're a 500 team outside of your own division. That happens to be the best division of football.
Yeah, doesn't make any sense. But things they can turn this around right now. A win over the Colts really heals a lot of it, and a loss to the Colts, I'm afraid of what that's going to do to the psyche of the team. But a win, I think, erases, at least in the players' minds, I think it erases what happened last week. And if the Cardinals can get any help from the Vikings or the Ravens or the 49ers, God bless them. That would be fantastic, because it would be clinching the division. I think will be a sigh of relief after how this stretch of games has gone. So it'd be great to win that division and then just see what happens in the postseason. So, coming up next on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's wrap this show up by talking about the Colts, the key team coming to town on Christmas Day. That's coming up next on Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. The Cardinals' next game, Christmas night, another short week. They have to play on Saturday night. It's going to be a good one. Cardinals-Colts. This Colts team is interesting because they appear to have hit their stride. They are 8-6, but have won 5 of their last 6 games. They have a disciplined defense. They have a a special running back, and they have a quarterback that's playing very efficiently this year. What do you see? What do you see in this Colts team overall?
I see a team that it has a good defense, a great ball control offense, and a quarterback that manages the game and doesn't make mistakes. And when you look at it, that's what they've done in this winning streak. I mean, you go back, they went into their week 6 game against Houston and they were 1-4. They had beat Miami. Outside of that, they had lost, their other 4 games to Seattle, Los Angeles, Tennessee, and Baltimore. They go into that Houston game. Carson Wentz is fine. I mean, 55% for 223 yards, 2 touchdowns. Next week against the 49ers, rainy game. I think we all remember that one, but 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. One of their 2 losses since then, Tennessee, close game, but he was 53%, 27 of 51, man. Like, that's a lot of passes to only complete 53%. And he threw 2 interceptions. The Jets game was probably his best game since of the season when they won. And then you look against Jacksonville, 180 yards. I mean, and they barely beat Jacksonville. You look at the win against Buffalo, he didn't do anything. 106 yards passing, 1 touchdown.
It really has been all about the run defense. Although I will, looking kind of at their schedule, the one concern that I have for the Colts, well, the one thing I think that bodes well for the Cardinals is looking at, and I'll look at the Jaguars game as because I will say this, the Colts have been winning their games in controlling fashion. Their wins were 45-30 over the Jets. They won at 23-17 over the Jaguars. It's a division game, and I kind of discount them. But then they boat raced the Bills 41-15. They beat the Texans 31-0. They were completely in control of the Patriots game 27-17. The one game where they were not fully in control of, and even they started out with a 17-7 lead, was the Buccaneers. The one team. So when you get them into a close game, they become much more beatable, and I think that kind of ties into exactly what the Cardinals do successfully. It makes teams one-dimensional. If you can get a lead and make them play from behind, Jonathan Taylor's not nearly going to be the factor that he is. And Carson Wentz, with only 6 interceptions, all 6 of those interceptions have come against playoff teams. 1 against the Rams, 2 against the Titans, 2 against the Bucks. He had 1 against the Patriots. Those are kind of Wentz's things. So he's got his 6 interceptions have come against playoff teams, which gives me some hope in terms of what the Cardinals can do, because the Cardinals are one of those type of teams that should be able to,
get out to an early lead.
Get out to a lead, and from there cause Carson Wentz. So, and Cliff said it, you've either got to limit Taylor or force Wentz to make mistakes. We've seen the Cardinals do it. They did it against Tennessee. They completely shut down Derrick Henry. They completely shut down the run game of the Cleveland Browns with 2 very good run games. So it is within them. How are they going to do it, though? Because sometimes they look so lost in the run game.
Well, and it just comes down to the fact that they've got what we talked about earlier. You and I and fans at this point aren't expecting it. And this is what I'll say, man. Like, this is the hard part. So you and I are unfortunately diehard Cardinals fans.
Yes.
And I don't mean to make that sound negative, whatever. But like, you and I pay way more attention to the Cardinals than probably 98% of the population. And that includes Cardinals fans. Like, even Cardinals fans, we pay way more attention. And the conversations, like, at work this week were about Well, it's the Cardinals. What do you expect? They're not really a good team. They're not a good organization. They're not a good franchise.
Oh, that
They're all
makes me so mad. It does. It
this
makes me
is
mad.
this is who they're always going to be. And
Poverty franchise. That's
right,
what you hear.
until they prove it on the field, no matter how much stuff has changed, that's who they are. And so that goes back to this run thing. Until you prove it on the field again, you and I know that they have locked down two of the best run games in the NFL, the Cleveland Browns and the Tennessee Titans. They completely shut them down. And yet the conversation going into this game from everywhere, including the NFL experts, people that actually know the game, is this is a lollipop. This is a layup. Jonathan Taylor is going to win your fantasy football championships or your semifinals this week. Like this was a godsend for Jonathan Taylor to get a week 16 matchup on Christmas Day on prime time against the Arizona Cardinals so we can all watch him run for 300 yards and 4 touchdowns and make this team a mockery again, right? Like that's what this was. That's what everybody thinks, that's what everybody expects. So until the Cardinals go out and prove it otherwise, that's the expectation for everybody. And us as fans, we get sick of defending it because every time we defend it, they go play the Lions and lose. And we're like, man, how do you justify losing to the Lions after you're saying, no, this is real, this is different. This time it's different, right? And so that's what it is. This team is more than capable of shutting down Jonathan Taylor. We have watched them, and I know J.J. Watt was there, but we have watched them shut down Derrick Henry. We have watched them shut down Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. We have watched them completely engulf fantastic running games. They can do it. But at some point, they have to stand up and do it. And you and I can't be the ones going, no, they have the ability to do it.
Yes. It comes down to two things. They have to do it early and get points, because after that, it won't matter.
Right. And if they get out to an early lead and they force the Indianapolis Colts and Carson Wentz to beat you, if Carson Wentz beats you, you just tip your cap, man. Like, that's the thing. And we can say Jared Goff beat him. Like, he played well. The stats look great, everything. The reason they won that game was because of Craig Reynolds. Like, that's all it was. Like, they literally could not stop Craig Reynolds at all. And that sets up everything else, because then that play action boot crap works to because then you can get outside your edge guys because they're so keyed in on the run. And then guys are running free because your safeties are feeling like they have to play so aggressively to come stop the run that they're giving up deep passes. And that happened in both touchdowns, right? Like the one to Josh Reynolds and the one to Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like, you know how to beat the Cardinals. Beg them to stop the run when they can't, and then you just let your average to bad quarterback just throw the ball all over them. If you get ahead and you take away the run game and you take away the play action game and you force them to beat you in a passing concept game, the only quarterback that's done that this year is Aaron Rodgers.
And even then, the Cardinals should have won that game. And it came down to two things in that game. Turnovers. It came down to turnovers. It came down to 3 turnovers that they had. So
right, exactly.
if they don't give away the football, which they tend not to do when they're ahead, it plays into the Cardinals' strengths. And let's be honest, I think they're going to do that. I think this team has enough pride and talent to turn things around, because otherwise that narrative only gets louder that this is a fraud, that this team, that Cliff Kingsbury doesn't have what it takes, that they're going to fade down the stretch and choke. So I believe the Cardinals will do that. I think that they will play some of their best ball early in the game. I think it will be a close game. I don't think they blow the Colts out, but I think much like that Tampa Bay game, ultimately Wentz is going to make mistakes and the Cardinals are going to come out on top.
Well, and that's the thing. They have to come out and they have to play fast. They have to get ahead quick. And if they don't, then this season's basically lost. And like we said, this can all be rectified in the playoffs, but we're talking, straight about the season as it is. And if they come out and they lose this game and get dominated, from the opening kickoff, then the season's over. And this has been a season where you go, what could have been?
Absolutely.
So when I look at it, man, it's tough. I truly don't know if this team can stop Indianapolis and Jonathan Taylor. I want to believe still, I really do, but this has just been such a hard season to believe in them. After when you went from incredibly confident and you're like, no, this is a great team, to really, like, are they good enough? And so I'm going to go with they tend to play good teams better. I think they're going to lose this game, but I think it's going to be closer. I think it's going to be a 31-27 Indy win.
And I've got it the other way around. I've got the Cardinals picking up a 31-28 win. And I think it will come down to an Indianapolis rally to try and pull it within. For they're going to be down by 10 in the final 4 minutes, get a touchdown, try to get that kind of where the Cardinals were in against the Rams. And it kind of goes from there. So I have the Cardinals winning this one 31-28. Jonathan Taylor goes for like 93 yards or whatever. He doesn't completely dominate. And his yards per carry will still be all right because he'll bust out a couple of runs. But the Cardinals will get out to a lead. Kyler throws for a couple of touchdown passes. Chase Edmonds gets in the end zone. And I think we turn things around. I'm gonna believe in the Cardinals another week. 31-28 to come away with the victory. Whew.
Yeah, and I'm like 100% on your side and hope that's what we see, man, because that's what this fan base needs more than anything, is to have their fandom, rewarded.
Right. We believed them all the year. Let's don't turn into the same old Cardinals. This isn't the same old Cardinals. They've won 10 games already this year. But
exactly.
But they got to come up with the wins down the stretch. So hopefully. So we've got a show next week. It will be Seth. Seth's got taking some time off with the family next week. So I will have another co-host with you guys next week. That's Seth Cox. We're coming to the end of this show. We'll hopefully be talking about a Cardinals win over the Colts. And if things go well on the other side of things, maybe the Vikings beat the Rams and we are on the verge of clinching the division. That would make for a lovely holiday weekend, to be honest. I would really love that. So on behalf of the Rise of C-Red podcast, happy holidays, Merry Christmas to you all. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening. We'll be back again next week.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, Sea Red, and of course, Rise up, Sea Red.